Hey friends, welcome back to Red Hot Mindset. I'm so glad you're joining us today, as I think that today is going to be a ton of fun and you're going to get a lot out of the episode. We're talking about working out to avoid burnout, and I know I've been burnt out and it's just not fun. This episode is very much teaching driven with a ton of great tips and tricks to get you in sync with your physiology so you can work out at your best. Today's guest has a multifaceted journey, and she has learned that the way she was training was a partial cause for her adrenal issues that she had. And because of these issues, she's realized how important it is for women to learn how to manage their energy in a culture that really supports productivity and constant hustle and bustle in workouts and in life. Jenni Hulbert is a holistic fitness specialist and natural health advocate who helps women live and sweat in sync with nature. She has bachelor's and master's degrees in exercise science and sports psychology. The Wild Wellness podcast programs and products are for women mindfully exploring holistic health and seeking to embody what nature has always modeled. It's not a sprint, it's a cycle. Today, we're talking all about how to regain energy and get more from workouts with less hustle. I know your ears just perked up, didn't they? They did for me. And okay, men, this is definitely an episode for women, but it doesn't mean you have to tune out. This could be a great way to understand what is going on with your significant other, or if you're a trainer or a coach, this could help you as you are working with women. So I'm sorry you have to listen about that time of the month, but I'm actually not sorry either. It's only natural. So Jenni shares her story of workout to burnout and how it made her shift her mindset into how to adjust as her body dictated rather than just working out intensely every time. Jenni and I talk about how to move with your cyclical body without depletion and how our cycle mimics nature's. We talk a bit about the cultural narrative around more and harder is better and why that messaging sets women up for overtraining and burnout. I really think that you are going to enjoy the episode today. So why don't we dive in and let's talk with Jenni. Hey, Jenni, welcome to Red Hot Mindset. I'm so glad that you're here to talk all about workout without burnout. I haven't done an episode like this yet. I've had runners come on and talk about their experiences, but I'm really excited to have an expert on with us to kind of share your story and some things that you've learned along the way.
Well, thank you. I'm super excited to be here and chat about it.
Yeah. Well, before we get going, why don't you just tell us a little bit about yourself, your background, where you're from, all that good stuff.
Sure. How did I come to discover how to work out without burnout? I grew up on a farm actually, and I think being raised by the farm, raised on the farm by the farm, it really anchored that connection to nature that seems to be a theme that I've kept coming back to in my life, because in my teens and early 20s, I really started to judge my body, as a lot of girls do, in a very critical way, and picked up on a lot of messages in our culture. And I began to struggle with an eating disorder and just a lot of difficulty around the way that I saw my body. And so what finally healed my relationship with food was going back to nature and understanding the difference between nature's food and processed food. And it was something I hadn't been taught. I even though I grew up on a farm eating out of the garden, we also had packaged processed foods in the pantry, and just something that, my parents were doing what they knew to be best, and doing the best that they could. So I had both in my world. And I think that what really helped, as I said, was learning that going back to nature's food versus processed food. And then I went on to study fitness and got my bachelor's in exercise science and my master's in sports psychology. So I knew I wanted to help people with their health. I actually had started out on a pre-med track before I switched over to a fitness focus. And I knew that conventional medicine just didn't feel like the right path for me. So that's where I landed in fitness. And so you would think that, studying health, studying fitness, going down that path, and having really got past the eating disorder at that point, then I became a personal trainer, and you'd think I knew how to be healthy and take care of myself, right? But I actually came across something else that ended up me going back to that nature concept again, because I didn't understand how to work with my cyclical body and my inner seasons, just as nature models for us. Like we embody different seasons throughout the month as women, which is part of what we'll get into here, I think. But as a runner, especially, I loved the adrenaline of challenging myself. And of course, I still do. It's something that us humans enjoy if we're into that sort of thing. And I loved really doing long efforts, and I ended up overtraining and really overdoing, and landed me in burnout. I had a lot of adrenal issues, and that showed up as me feeling tired all the time and not being able to keep up with my personal training clients and wanting to take a nap in the afternoon, not sleeping well. My hormones were really out of whack. I was having painful cramps, and periods were off, and constant headaches, migraines, just a lot of weird things going on. I mean, not to mention that I didn't feel like myself emotionally, mentally. I was really struggling. And so, because I was completely exhausted and did not feel like myself, I knew something was wrong and I had to figure out another way. And that's when I started to understand more about my cyclical body. And I hadn't really been modeled that either up to that point. You know, the fitness kind of mindset and the fitness culture is all about starting at one point and kind of working your way up the mountain and working in a linear fashion. And this whole cyclical concept was totally new to me. So I feel like, again, it took me back to nature and that anchor of just that model that it has for us. So now I love teaching other women how they can still reach their goals without sacrificing their well-being along the way, and doing that through what I call living and sweating in sync with nature, because it's not a sprint, it's a cycle.
Yeah, I love that. And I'm really excited to talk a little bit about that today. I want to kind of get a little deeper into the burnout too and your story. So, when you say, you worked out to burnout, what were you doing? What was your daily activity like? Why do you think you ended up in that burnout?
Yeah, that's a great question, because I do think it's always a combination of things. And it wasn't just what I was doing for workouts. I'm sure that it was how I was taking care of myself. I'm thinking back to like when I was getting my master's degree, and probably I did this in undergraduate too in college. And I'm sure even further back than that into high school and whatever. But I remember a time when I would just be working at the computer and finishing up my research, or working on a project or whatever, and then I would just be like, okay, time to go to bed, and hop into bed. And that is not my sleep routine now. Like, I need time to wind down, and it's really important that I do that. And that came through learning that that wasn't working. And I'm not sleeping. What's going on with me? Why can't I just hop into bed anymore and go to sleep? So I had to learn how to do that different. So, I mean, it came from habits like that. And I think it also came from other stressors that were going on in life. My sister had gone through a diagnosis with cancer, and that was pretty big for our family, and just something that was really difficult. I also had moved a lot. So, having moved away for graduate school and then moved several times while I was in graduate school, and then moved again for like first job, and then moved again. So there was a lot of moves. So even transitions and change, which I think we don't always realize, that even though a lot of those things were positive changes, getting married, moving to a new place, starting a new job, like it was all exciting and they were all positive things. But change is stress on the body, and you have a chance to adapt to it, and you have a chance to um, basically shift how you are doing things, or shift how you're responding in that environment. But sometimes it's just too much for the body, and sometimes it's too much all at once. So I think there was that piece going on too. And so also I have been a runner back in since high school. I ran cross country, and then in college I actually ran and competed then as well on the cross country team. And then after graduating, it was just still something I loved to do. So, I got involved in races, and I was doing a lot of half marathons ish distance. I love trail running. So they were a little bit different, but they were around half marathon. And then I dipped into really going straight from like competing half marathon race to really wanting to just go longer and doing my own sort of adventure runs, and along with my husband, who also loves to run. And we would go ultra distance and we did 40 some, almost 50-mile one day in the Grand Canyon, and just like doing things like that were really fun and really adventurous, and didn't think twice about it because my body was keeping up and I was able to do it. And I had never known anything else. So it was really interesting because running was my primary um, exercise of choice, my primary thing that I love to do. But I also did enjoy biking, and still mountain bike. Swimming, I had gotten into, especially when we lived in Arizona, because it was so nice all times of the year, and I could go outside in the pool pretty much 12 months out of the year and swim. So that was fun. But, a variety of different cardio things, but running was still my primary thing that I would go back to. And it's really interesting because there's also this mindset that I notice around us runners that if we don't run, then it wasn't a good enough workout, or like we still have to run too.
Oh yeah.
So you could do one thing, but like if you didn't run that day, then you still had to do something else. So yeah, so some days I would, do swim if I had time between personal training clients, do a quick little half an hour swim, and then later on it would just still need to be to get the miles in. And I was strength training too and doing some of that, but definitely more heavy on the cardio side of things, because I was really geared towards getting ready for, training for those fun trail races and all those challenging endurance type experiences that we would do on mostly the weekends, and going and climbing mountains and things. So my mind was on that more so. And I did strength training here and there, of course, and kind of knew to keep that balance, but definitely was more geared towards the endurance events to talk about, answer your question about what kind of workouts was I doing and what did that look like. So does that help? Is that where we needed to land?
Yeah, absolutely. And I definitely see that runner mindset because I have that too. It's kind of like nothing's a good enough workout unless I get my run in, because
Yeah.
strength training is so boring to me. It's so slow. Like, stretching is so slow. And the run is just that adrenaline. And I think a lot of runners will relate to that.
Mm-hmm.
What was, when you got to this point of burnout, what was your mindset at that point? Like, where were you? What, were you frustrated? Were you negative? Like, what was your mindset at that point?
About workouts, about life in general, just
Yeah, how were you
overall, you're
feeling? Yeah.
thinking? Yeah. Honestly, at the time, I think I was feeling pretty motivated and excited about everything that was going on in life. Like I had just been a few years into personal training after graduating, so I was having a lot of fun with that. And even though we were in a new place, I had built up my clients pretty quickly, so like I felt good about the work that I was doing and who I was getting to work with. And there was always new things and stuff coming up that way, but yeah, I felt excited about work and wanting to do it. Training wise, I was having a lot of fun. As I mentioned, like it just felt like I was able to do all the things and there was no limit, there was no barrier. So if I look back though, I think it was really years in the making, as most people would probably say when they experience adrenal issues or burnout or whatever they're calling it, because there's this there's these periods of time that you can look back and see, yeah, I can see where I was struggling then. And it's like you have these up and down dips and waves. But at the time, it didn't feel like much to me. It didn't feel like a big issue. So I just kept going until it really became apparent that, again, I was having headaches almost every day. I was really tired all the time. And I wasn't, it's at that point, I had already been someone who like understood nutrition and how to fuel my body well. So it was like, well, like, you read all the things about how you're eating and digestive stress and eliminating processed foods. And I was like, check, check, check. Like, that's not me. I'm doing good that way. I'm not even drinking coffee. Like, I'm barely tapping into some green tea for caffeine to get me through the day. So it wasn't like I had all that going on. And so that probably helped at that point because I knew it was something else. I knew it wasn't kind of the basic nutritional things. But saying that, it's funny because it definitely was basic sleep routines, like basic sleep habits, basic mindfulness practices. And I will say that up until that point too, I really hadn't explored meditation very much or yoga. anything that was sort of, in my perspective now, like on the other side of what I was doing, something that would quiet my mind and my body. And I started committing to twice a week going to a yoga class that was at the health club where I worked as a personal trainer, and just blocking out that hour on those 2 days a week to make sure that I could go, because I remember thinking this is the only hour of my day that I feel like more calm, and that my mind actually can stop, and I feel like winding down. And I also remember starting to do like feet up the wall at night, where, I would invert, be against the wall, like in an L shape, where your back's on the floor, butt's against the wall, feet are up the wall. It's a
Yeah.
very restorative pose, like to reset the nervous system. And I would start doing that. And I did start exploring deep breathing and meditation, things that I hadn't been introduced to yet, but that were so important for rebooting my nervous system and recovering, and just exploring that whole concept of rest, which was completely foreign to me at that point, apparently. So,
Yeah. Yeah. I think some of us sometimes when you're really cardio driven or really
mhm.
into fitness, we forget that rest is important. Like the recover is just as important as the exercising itself. So I can see how those mindset shifts needed to happen. You were doing all the things right when it came to food, but then you still kind of decided, I'm going to go on a journey to figure out what is really happening. Why, how do you sync your body with your workouts and things like that. Now, what was the first shift that you made when you realized I'm in this burnout, I'm doing all the things right, fueling right. What's my next step? What was your first shift? Was it the mindfulness or was it something else?
Yeah, interestingly, I think it wasn't what I was doing workout wise, which is what I came to later. I knew that I needed to slow down and take a break from certain things, because I just wasn't able to do it. Even like the runs that I had been doing, they weren't happening in that same way. So I did have to change things there, and I knew I had to scale back a little bit. But unfortunately, I didn't really know what that looked like. And it's really hard to tell someone who loves to run or loves to do something physical with their body, and who gets a lot of joy and stress relief out of that, to just, okay, you have to take a break. You need to,
Right.
slow down. You have adrenal issues, and it's like, what does that look like? That was, again, a totally foreign thing to me, because I would have told my clients, yes, you have to take rest days, and build them a program that was very balanced in that regard. But I didn't understand cyclical nature of women's bodies, and that was the key missing piece. And even though I would have told my clients about taking rest days and plan that into their routine, I thought I was doing that. I was doing it according to what I had been taught, really, but I wasn't. Again, it's really different as women when we have certain times of the month that our hormones are different, and we have different needs, and we're not on the same kind of linear path that you would build a normal, or a typical, I should say, workout plan around. So that was that's something that came later on. But I would say, back to your question of what did I do first, it was realizing that I did need to switch what I was doing for workouts. And I tried to fumble around and figure that out by scaling back and doing less.
Mhm.
And thankfully, later I did figure out the cyclical workout routine that really does work long term for sustainable exercise and working out without burning out sustainably. But I would say the next thing, it definitely was incorporating more just overall anchors in my day where there was a shift. And it wasn't just that I get up in the morning and I go until I drop into bed at night. There was these
Right.
periods where, like you said, use the word mindfulness. You're mindful of your breathing at different times throughout the day, or you're mindful of the fact that, like, you need to be avoiding blue light and screens an hour at least before bedtime, maybe more. So I started to pay more attention to that. And I was conscious of my sleep already, and like how many hours I was getting. But because I was struggling with that and not getting as much as I needed, that was difficult too. So I started to explore things that could help me naturally with sleep, and also help me naturally with headaches, because I was someone for a while up until that point who really didn't want to just pop pills for symptoms. And even during that time, I had been to a doctor to try to get some help and do tests and figure out what was going on. And she wanted to put me on an antidepressant.
Mm.
And I just remember walking away and thinking like, no, that's not what's wrong here. Like yeah, sure, I feel depressed, but that's because I'm not feeling like myself. And there's something deeper that's wrong. And, everyone's choices are different and whatever they choose, but that wasn't the right next choice for me because I knew I needed to get to the core issue. So I moved on, went to a different doctor. And I also remember walking out of there thinking, like, I have a lot of natural ways that I can help myself with just that part of this puzzle, which is just one piece. And so that was actually where I really started to tap into essential oils too. They've become a huge part of my personal life for the last decade or more, and also a part of my work because I believe so much in the healing power of nature and how that can support us physically and emotionally. So I really started to look to them for, how to help with sleep, how to get relief from that head tension that I was having almost constantly, and even ones that would help with adrenal support and hormones. And I just found like, wow, there's plants that can support me with just about everything, and that became a major tool too. And then I did go to get tests. So it was I had a feeling that I had, because of reading and because of understanding, I had a feeling that I was dealing with adrenal issues. And so I started to sort of treat myself in that way, and do the things that made sense in that regard. But then I went and to a functional medicine practitioner. He was actually a chiropractor slash functional medicine doctor, and did the test to actually see, what my cortisol levels were and where my estrogen and progesterone were and everything. And that's when I also got support with some of his work with chiropractic and supplements to support me in that way.
Yeah, yeah, that's great. So when it comes to getting tested, are there any important tests that you think women should get to see where their levels are, and that will help when we talk about syncing with our cycles and different things?
As far as I know, just from my personal experience, I wouldn't say I'm an expert in that, but just from my personal experience, like an adrenal hormone test is usually going to have the various stress hormones like cortisol and DHEA. And then it's also going to look at progesterone, estrogen, various estrogens, estradiol, testosterone, and those. And that I've seen many times all in one test bundle. And a lot of times you can get those either through a functional medicine practitioner. I mean, I guess most of the time they are through a functional medicine practitioner, but it doesn't always have to be someone like if you live somewhere that you're like, I don't even know anyone around me that is a functional medicine practitioner. It could be someone who does that sort of via telemedicine or, distance. They can order the test, you can have it shipped to you. The test that I did was a saliva test. So that's something you can do in a home test kit and get those tested and then send it off, get the results back, and then even have a consult with someone via phone or video conference.
Yeah, yeah, that's a great idea. I think
Mm-hmm.
especially for those who don't live near or don't like to go to the doctor all the time or different things, that's a great option.
Mm-hmm.
So let's get into get into working in sync with nature.
Mm-hmm.
What are some things that you've found, or maybe we want to talk through each season? Let's just, I want to hear all about it. I'm excited.
Yeah, I think that would be a good place to start because it kind of anchors the conversation into us thinking about how this matches with our cycle. So, as women, our menstrual cycle is normally around 28, 29 days. And if you're starting to listen to this right now and you're ready to tune out because you're like, okay, one, I don't have a cycle for whatever reason, medication, or you just don't right now, or you haven't ever, or you're in menopause, like for whatever reason, you don't have a cycle, stick with me because you can actually follow the moon cycle too, the moon phases, because our menstrual cycle actually follows and I don't want to say mimic, but it shadows, I guess, the moon phases as well. So let's start with menstruation. That would be considered day one of the cycle. And if you are anchoring to the moon phases because you don't have a period to anchor to, then you would start with day one as the new moon. And then from there, you'd have follicular phase, and then you would go on to the luteal phase, and then ovulatory phase, and then luteal phase. So we'll go through those again, but I'll just anchor at the other point. So your menstruation, day one, new moon, and then ovulation would be about midway through the cycle, and that would be related to the full moon. So if you don't have a cycle, and as I'm talking about this, just think back to those moon phases. And so I think one of the most important places to start is actually to understand your own cycle and your own body. So if you don't already track your cycle and know that this is day one, and like right now, I know that I'm on day 11 in my cycle. Like if you're thinking I have no idea what day I'm on, it's okay, but that would be a perfect place to start, because it's really going to help you to understand what to do and how to work out in sync with it. That's really the imperative first step, is to track that. So at minimum, just start tracking the day. So even if you want to look back in the calendar and look at day one, or if you're having your period now, you could start, or just next time you have your period, you can start it then, and track that as day one, and then on from there. So once you have that, and once you're tracking which day you're on and you understand that, then what I learned along the way through the first book that I read that referred to the phases this way was called Wild Power. And it actually talks about each of the four main phases of the menstrual cycle in relationship to the seasons. So the menstrual phase, that first day of our cycle, to maybe day 5, most women bleed for maybe 3 to 5 days. That would be considered our inner winter. And then the next phase, the follicular phase, would be inner spring. That's usually days like 6 to 11. And then the ovulatory phase, days 12 to 19-ish, would be inner summer. And then the luteal phase, days 20 to 27 or so, is inner autumn. And that's based on a 28-day cycle, of course. So if yours is a little longer, then those days aren't going to be exact for everyone. But that's, again, the importance of you tracking. And as you get a little bit more into this, beyond tracking the days, you'll actually want to track how you're feeling with your energy, what your workout was for that day, how your mood was, how your digestion was. And I know it sounds like a lot, but it's really not. There's just a few simple things that I teach in the Workout Without Burnout blueprint that you track, so that you can look back and see patterns and start to understand your own cycle better, and know that, well, I start to see that this usually happens around day 20 something. So next time I'm going to set myself up better for it, like this kind of thing. So those are the four main phases. And I do love to relate to them and think of them as the seasons, because of my connection with nature and just how I think it embodies them so well, because they really do kind of take on some of the symbols that we would get from the outside world, from nature. For example, menstruation, the inner winter phase, it is the stage of bleeding, of course, but it is a phase where we're kind of turned inward. So it's a more inward, dark focused energy. It's not uncommon that you don't necessarily feel like being around other people during this phase. You'd like to have some more alone time
Hibernate.
rather than, yeah, hibernate. Exactly. That's the perfect word. And instead of going to the group workout class, just we'll focus on kind of the fitness vibes and the moving your body vibes that you might have. Instead of doing that, you might want to go for a solo hike in the woods, just being out somewhere quiet and not having a lot of noise and distraction. I mean, you might not even want to just go to the gym and run on a treadmill or do something there, because there's just lights and noise and just a lot of stuff going on. You might want to do something more peaceful, more quiet in that way, and alone. And maybe you don't feel like that, and that's okay. So I do want to say that all the vibes that I talk about as far as what the workout vibes are for each of these phases, it's not going to be the same for everyone. And it's not going to be the same for each of your cycles, because I notice sometimes, even recently, I typically feel one way during the menstrual phase, during that inner winter. But during this past cycle, I felt pretty different. And it was a totally new experience for me. And it was sort of like, what's going on here? But you just kind of, take it as it comes. And there's a lot of different factors that can influence that. So most women do need to slow down during this time. There is some research out there, of course, and just a lot of talk that working out when you are on your period can help with cramps, and it can help with all these things that are going on that you might want help with during your period. But it's totally a personal choice. What I think is so important is to not lock into that messaging and think like, oh, well, I need to work out because I'm going to feel better. If you don't feel better and if you don't feel like working out the first day of your period, then don't. And I'm raising my hand, like saying most of the time, I don't like working out. And I'm someone who is a consistent person that moves their body. I love it, obviously. I hope that I do as we're
Yeah.
talking about all of this, but it's not an issue for me. It's not something I'm like, oh, most of the time. Most of the time I love moving my body, but that first day or two of my period, I just totally let myself off the hook. No rest day guilt, do whatever I need to do, because a lot of times I just don't feel like doing what I normally would feel like doing. And
Okay.
that was a struggle for me when I first, before I understood this, because I would beat myself up for like, oh, well, I need to go today. When am I going to feel good enough to go? And it's just time to let that go and step away and rest and recover if that's what you need to. And do maybe some other things that you don't normally do. So if you're confused, like, I'm a runner, why do I not feel like running? Maybe do some yoga, some stretches, maybe work on something that you don't normally pay attention to, but that, you maybe have some aches in your hips or your low back during this time too, because it's something that a lot of women deal with cramps and things. So maybe focus on that and do something that feels good and something that doesn't further stress your nervous system. So
Yeah.
less intense activities is kind of the general vibe. And then as you shift into the next phase, it sort of goes on this rise of energy. So the follicular phase is like inner spring. So just like outside, things are blooming, things are starting to come to life. It's not necessarily towards the peak summer moment of blooming yet, but your hormone levels begin to rise and they peak later on in that phase. But because of that higher estrogen, you are more resilient to cortisol. Your pain threshold is higher, and you may overstretch too. So be careful of that. You're kind of more apt to uh, pull a muscle because of that higher estrogen. So even though you can do more, it's not necessarily you should not pay attention to the things that you normally would, and still have a good warm up and things. But it makes so much sense that we become more resilient to cortisol levels. So that would suggest that we could maybe do higher intensity activities. And a lot of times it's those ones where it might be more interval work. So short bursts of high intensity activity instead of like that long duration cardio. And carbohydrates are used more efficiently during this phase too, which again matches with higher intensity cardio, because when you are doing high intensity cardio, that's the main fuel that you're using is carbohydrates, versus if you're doing like a slower, longer endurance, then you might be tapping into more of fat as a fuel. So it just makes so much sense that that's what you would want to do, is maybe more high intensity. So it could be sprints, it could be hill repeats. If you're not a runner and you're into strength training, it could be more short bursts. Maybe you actually do a little bit of cardio in between your weights. You're doing burpees, you're doing jumping jacks, you're hopping on the bike, something like that. Just also keep it playful. It's kind of that time, if you just think of it from an overall standpoint of where you're just coming back into, maybe you're feeling like you're coming back to life a little bit. And for some people, like even just doing a dance class or some kind of like fun aerobic type trampoline type class where you're bouncing around and doing something different than you normally do can be really helpful.
Okay. So it's a place, is this time a time that you could try something new? Like, would this
Yeah.
be the best time to do that then?
Yeah, it would be for sure. Your energy and your whole mindset, everything is
Okay.
more aligned with that.
Interesting.
And it's more of a like the yin and yang. So that winter is more yin, more cool, dark, slow energy, and spring is more yang. So that's more high energy, heat, fast, all those kinds of words and things you might think of. And so is the inner summer, the ovulation phase, which comes next.
Okay.
So then you have these hormones like estrogen and follicle stimulating hormone, they're going to peak during that ovulation phase, and you're going to have peak energy levels too with that peak estrogen. So you want to take advantage of that high energy, perhaps, especially if you're
Mhm.
training for something. Maybe this is when you do your longest runs. Maybe it's when you do the harder class. Maybe it's when you opt for that spin class instead of something easier on your own. Just think of the things that maybe you'll want to go for a PR or do higher mileage that week, and embrace the harder efforts and know that you'll be able to recover most likely from them quicker too. But again, I'm saying this, and it's not as clear cut as you um, as it sounds, because you're going to have to track your own personal experience. And I'm just thinking that because I've definitely had inner summers, my ovulatory phase, where I've thought to myself, why don't I have more energy right now? Like, this is supposed to be my peak time and I don't feel that great, or it's a little up and down, I feel great one day and then like another day, but there's so many other factors and so many other things going on. And I am not an expert in it, but I think astrology has a lot to do with it, and just what's going on with different phases of the moon. And there's so many things, what's going on in our lives, our stress levels, things like that. So that's why, again, it's just so important to track it. It's so important to go back to you understanding it through tracking it, and then being able to work with it as it comes, and know that it's not always going to be the same, and it's okay. Like, not to beat yourself up for, again, like, well, this is supposed to be like this and it's not, so what do I do with that now? It's so much easier when we don't resist how it is, and we just learn from what we're experiencing right now. So yes, inner summer can be more of a high energy phase typically for people, but you'll see what your experience is like. And as you get to the end of that ovulation phase, or if you aren't menstruating, again, this is full moon time. Right after that is when you would go into the luteal phase, and this is the premenstrual. I call this the recovery phase too. So estrogen levels dip after ovulation, and progesterone is higher in this phase. And so a lot of women struggle with this phase the most. And I would say this is the one that is still the one that I probably work with the most closely, as far as noticing what I need to do different, because it's sort of like you are coming off of this high paced, super fun summer energy. And if you don't slow down enough, it's like you just hit a wall. And I feel like I've done that at times where I don't notice that I'm coming into that phase, and all of a sudden it's just like, okay, you gotta dip here. This is a dip in the cycle. It's more of that yin energy again. And also, there's some hormonal up and downs in this cycle that can make women feel sluggish, or bring on other things like with our mood, or even different aches and head tension in our body. So you'll likely have more energy in the first part of the cycle, but as you get closer to your period, it's not uncommon that you're just not going to feel like working out, or you're not going to feel like doing what you normally do for as long as you do, as hard as you do it. It's going to need to change.
Mm.
And yes, maybe your workouts are going to help with your mood and with bloating and with some of the things you might experience, which aren't necessarily optimal, but they're common. So I will just say that it helps so much to get support with those PMS symptoms around your period, because a lot of times I think as women, what we consider normal, or like, oh, it just comes with the package as being a woman, it's not necessarily optimal. Like, you don't have to feel like that. It can be better. And there's things that you could do to shift your experience if you look into nutrition and managing stress and sleep, and maybe different essential oils to help you and things like that. So it doesn't have to be this miserable time of the month that I think it often gets touted as. And also, like I said, with the workouts, just because you do feel lower energy, it doesn't mean that you have to push yourself just because you think that it might make you feel better, because maybe your body's trying to tell you to slow down for a reason. So what I like to think about for a practical level on this phase with workouts is, just one idea to take away from this is to think of something that maybe you've been neglecting for a while, maybe even just throughout the last cycle, that needs a little attention. Maybe it's like a nagging tight hip, or you have this shoulder issue going on, or you know that you want to work on glutes or your low back, or just some particular part of your body. Maybe you're working on alignment or core, just one issue, and just it's probably not something that you are focused on every day. It's probably not something that you've been paying attention to. So pay attention to it now and address it and see, kind of do a body scan and think, what's bothering me right now? What doesn't feel as good as I'd like it to? And how can I help myself? How can I support myself and be really kind to myself right now instead of beat myself up for not wanting to do what I expect myself to do?
Yeah, that makes sense because I would say the fall in the
Mm-hmm.
last part of the cycle is when
Mm-hmm.
I get frustrated with myself because I'm not able to put out all I want, or I'm just sluggish. I don't feel like, the endurance isn't there. And you get so frustrated. I mean, it does help to know that that's natural and that means, hey, maybe you need to take a rest, or maybe it's okay. I know for me, I have a hard time taking a rest because I want to keep training. And our training plans, I've come to terms with this, but I know a lot of us, I mean, runners listening to you are probably saying, I can't take a break. My training plan says this is what I got to do today. So,
Mm-hmm.
how do you work around that when your training plan says you need to get in your long run and you don't feel like doing it?
Yeah. Yeah, the first thing that I want to say is it's so good to have a plan, but you can't fall in love with the plan. Like have a plan, but just be willing to be adaptable. And it's one of the most important things I think we can take on in our lives too, not just in our workouts.
Mhm.
I did my master's thesis research on women who had chronic pain and looked at how they navigated pain and stress and exercise. So I actually looked at whether exercise was a buffer for them for pain and stress.
Mhm.
And it was in some ways, but a lot of the women that I interviewed, some of the things that came out were really interesting because one of the most important themes was that the women who were able to navigate exercise the best and the ones who actually were doing it and the ones who were getting help with their pain because of being able to move their body, they were adaptable. So on the days that they didn't feel like doing the bike, they went for a swim. Or on the days they didn't feel like doing anything at all, they just went for a walk or they did something. They were flexible. So I always remember that now as just one of the most important things that I think we can be as workout people, as just to take one of the most important lessons to take into our workout. So as a runner, especially if that's you, and you might wonder how that looks when you do have that set training plan. And like I was kind of talking about in the beginning with how different I would write plans now for personal training clients if I were doing it again, because I definitely knew, and there's ways to do it so that you are writing a progression, but what most plans do is base it off of a linear progression. So you might have some weeks on, let's say, a half marathon training plan where you have a dip in your mileage, right? And you have a little bit of a rest week, but that might not align with your cycle very well. So, what I would say is if you're getting a training plan from maybe a coach or you're just getting a generic one offline, either way, whatever you are looking at, is look at the plan and then actually track your cycle alongside of that and start to pay attention to that week that you might not be feeling like doing the highest intensity things, and see where you can rearrange that, because you can still progress towards a goal in a cyclical way. I mean, look at how we live our lives. our,
Right.
our days are cyclical, the seasons are cyclical, and like there's still progress, there's still things happening, we're still evolving, we're still growing. Nature doesn't have a problem with that. It just works in cycles instead. Like look at the trees. They still grow, they still make their way up taller and bigger and all of that. So yeah, there's still room for that, and it just might look different than what you're used to, and it's going to have to be individual based on your cycle, which is going to be different than everybody else's. So that's part of what I teach in the blueprint is kind of how to look at that linear versus cyclical plan and create your own training plan, and then also using your intuition to guide your workouts and how to consider, like, should I take a rest day or should I tough it out, and having a plan, but then being able to listen to your body and being able to ask the right questions to yourself so that you can decide. And then also what you can do if you're just not sure and maybe you do need to test it out a little bit. So one of the things that I I think we do need to ask ourselves more is, what do I really feel like doing today? Not what the training plan says, but what does my body feel like? And I know as a runner, sometimes you have to test that a little bit. Sometimes you'll feel like, oh, well, right now, like I don't feel like going out, but then you're 10 minutes into the run and you feel awesome. Has that ever happened before, Gabe? Yes.
Always. I think
I
most
know.
runners, it takes a mile or two to feel good.
Right. So test it out, but then be willing to drop it and shift gears if you need to. That's the hard part, maybe for some people. And I know it has been for me too in the past, before I really anchored in and understood that I just felt so much better by doing it this way. But if you get started and you're so attached to doing what you were out to do, like, I have to do these 7 miles, this is what I said I was going to do, instead of getting so attached to that, if you're doing those first 2 miles and you're just like, this isn't my day, then switch what you were doing. Maybe instead of the workout, maybe you're doing it slower, maybe you're not doing the workout at all, maybe you're doing strength training instead that day. I think we plan that's cookie cutter, that's going to match what your body needs optimally. And if you would just consider the possibility that if you listen and match what your body wants, and you can trust that to get you to where you want to go, and it can work that way, I think you'll be just so happy with how that feels and where you actually get to. It's just letting go of that old way of thinking and that old way of doing things, and believing that the training plan is exactly what you need to do and has all the answers, because your body actually has all the answers.
Yeah, I think that's really solid advice, because I think it is important. As runners, we're so rigid sometimes, and we have to have that flexibility and listen to our bodies, because our bodies are going to tell us. And sometimes we do push through, but then we have to listen to say this is not the time to push through. So I do want to kind of wrap up by talking a little bit about some of the cultural and fitness messages that are out there that we hear today that set women up for overtraining or for burnout. I know that you've talked about a few of them, so I'd love for you to address that, and just what are those messages?
I think one of the first ones is that we do need to go hard or go home, or whatever that comes out as, or do a little bit more, a little bit more, a little bit more. Because again, that's a linear model that might work for a more masculine approach.
Hmm.
Even though men are cyclical too, they have daily cycles, but it's a little different than ours. But it just, that more is better mentality, or that intensity, I really truly believe and have found through my personal experience and seeing other women do this, that you can do less overall in workouts and get better results. And it's not about doing less, like it's not just about taking all this rest, and like there's still principles that apply. I totally get it with my background in physiology, that like you have to stress the body in certain ways so that you adapt, and there's still certain progression that your body will need to make. But when I say rest more to get better results, it's more about that overall cycle, and resting at the times that it's important to rest, and going harder at the times that you can. Because if you think about it, if you actually do rest when your body is wanting to, then think about those times maybe that you have taken a break, or you come to the end of a race season, if we're talking about running, and you just train for something and then you take a couple weeks off. And yeah, when you first come back to your running, you're maybe a little clunky, but sometimes you feel super refreshed, right? And you actually can do things that you're like, wow, I didn't realize how tired I was. Like part of the training is maybe sometimes doing things while you're a little fatigued, because then you learn how to, your body learns how to adapt to that. But it's so important to just consider the fact that by taking a rest, that you actually can do more intensity and maybe reach higher levels. Because if you're never actually able to get to that intensity because you're not rested, then you're never going to reach that potential. So rest can actually be really valuable, and I don't think it's talked about enough in fitness, because we kind of see it as this weak thing, or something that you have to do if you're injured, or it's just not fun for people who like to work out, right? Because you have to stop doing what you're doing, or at least do it different. And
Hmm.
maybe that's an important consideration too, is to see rest as not just stopping altogether, but being able to challenge yourself in new ways, or challenge yourself with things that you wouldn't normally challenge yourself with. And for example, the way that we breathe is so important in how we work out, especially as runners. So
Hmm.
maybe instead of just pushing through the same mileage you do all the time and the same workouts and following the plan, maybe there's actually a time of quote unquote rest where you are learning about some different breathing methods that you could incorporate into your training, and that's going to make you better overall. So it doesn't have to be that you stop. It doesn't have to just be like, okay, sit down in a chair and do nothing. That's not the idea. You can still be learning, you can still be expanding in so many different ways, mentally and physically. So I think, yeah, the linear versus cyclical idea is really important, and just that workouts shouldn't always be the same for women, especially. It's about this ebb and flow that we have.
Yeah.
So that's the one that's coming to my mind the strongest right now that we hear as far as messaging in fitness culture,
Yeah.
which isn't all bad. It helps to encourage us and helps to motivate us to reach goals that maybe we wouldn't have reached for otherwise. But just keep this in your head that you're cyclical. And if you do that, you can still push towards things and challenge yourself, but without feeling depleted.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. And I think one of the biggest things is reminding ourselves that our physiology is not the same as men. Like, so a lot of the messaging and a lot of even the nutrition and all these things are geared more toward the men's physiology. So we have to learn what our physiology is, which, like you said, kind of is based on our cycle. It's based on
Mm-hmm.
us, ourselves, because it's individual, and being okay with what our physiology is and finding it and being able to work with it, because that's going to be where you get your best results. Is that what you would say, Jenny, too?
Oh, definitely. Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up because yeah, we kind of went there a little bit in that last point, but yeah, totally. That's sort of its own separate idea on its own, is that we are we are different biologically, physiologically, hormonally, all of that. And so we need different things. And so much of the research, so many of the recommendations, they are based on men's bodies.
Hmm.
And it's important to notice that. So if you do see a piece of advice or a piece of research or some kind of content out there that is suggesting something, look at it through that lens of, was this based on research on men or on women? And does that matter? There's actually a great book by Stacy Sims, I believe that's her name. It's Roar, ROAR.
Just read that.
Um, did you?
Yes, I couldn't
And
remember
what's
who wrote it.
her tagline is what? Women are not small men, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I have, yeah, it was, did you read it on audiobook or hardcover?
Yeah, on Kindle. So yeah, hard.
Okay. I had it on audiobook, and it was good that way too. So just for a side note, if anyone's wondering what would be good there, I think there's some supplemental maybe graphs or PDFs to look at. But yeah, she goes into a lot of various physiological aspects and even into nutrition and how that can be different, or women during pregnancy and post pregnancy, and some of the myths that have been put out there about women's bodies, and um, just really in a very masculine focused culture in a lot of ways, how we need to reassess what we've been taught about our bodies and about workouts and how that all aligns.
Yeah. Gosh, I could talk about this all day. It's so fascinating to me. And
Mm-hmm.
I think I'm still learning my own physiology and what works, especially now that I'm, moving toward my 40s, and, things change and all that.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's just fascinating. I would love to talk all day, but I would love for you to just share a little bit. If anybody would like to come follow you, where can they find you? And maybe you can talk a little bit about that wild blueprint as well.
Yeah, if anyone wants more resources, just more learning on this, a great place to go would be my website, jennihulbert.com/wild. There is free audio training there called Why Your Workouts Feel Hard and How to Challenge Yourself Without Feeling Depleted. And also a quiz that you can take to see which season you most naturally embody in your workouts, because it's interesting to notice where you lean towards, and
Mhm.
then what benefits there might be to that, what kind of perks there are, but then also what challenges you might face because of that. So the couple really great things kind of to go to next after this conversation would be there, jennihulbert.com/wild. And the workout without burnout blueprint is something that you'll find there too. You could actually just go right to workoutwithoutburnout.com for that. But that's a self study course where you can learn all about what we've been talking about and how to really apply it to your own training plan, whether that's you're running or whether you like to do a variety of things, you're into strength training too, or whatever it might be. It's really something you can take and apply to whatever it is you're doing and learn more about, how to use your intuition to guide your workouts, how to create a cyclical plan versus a linear one, or how to rework the one that you have so that it is more based on that, and going deeper into each of those phases so that you understand more about them, and also how to track your cycle alongside your workouts, because that's sort of the next step. Maybe right now you track your workouts but you're not tracking your cycle, and so I just encourage you to track your cycle so that you know which day you're even on and what part of the cycle you're in. But then once you start tracking both alongside each other, you can really start to learn more about what you need and just optimize everything that you're doing, and hopefully have more fun and feel better, and also get better results overall with whatever you're training for and what you're wanting to see yourself being able to do.
Yeah, I love it. Well, thank you, Jenny, so much for coming and sharing your wisdom with us. I'm excited to
Uh,
try and apply some of these things. I've been working on some of them, but I think I got a few more tips that I get to try and use as well. So I've appreciated this chat. It's been really, really fun.
Thank you. Likewise, I appreciate you so much and everything that you're sharing, and the podcast and making this available for people. So thanks for the great conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't know if you're anything like me, but I'm ready to try figuring out how to sync my workouts to the seasons and really focus in on the physiology of my body. Jenny gave some tangible tips on how to work out without burnout. Don't play into the messaging that more is better. Be willing to listen to your body and push hard at times, but pull back at others. Rest is just as important in the workout cycle. I'll link the books we talked about as well as how to find Jenny in case you want to learn more about how to sync your workouts with nature. Until next time, I pray that you just run your race. I believe in you.